For 7 years, Chairman Kang Min-jun had performed a single, consistent act of erasure. He had built an empire of concrete and steel, of logistics and fear, a towering edifice of power in the Seoul underworld, and in all that time, he had meticulously edited his wife, Kim Soo-jin, from the public record of his life. She was a secret, kept in a penthouse, a ghost who managed his books, but never graced a banquet. The reason was simple, brutal, and aesthetic. His wife was a plus-size woman, and in the gleaming, superficial world of galas and summits he now inhabited, she was a flaw in the perfect image he projected. He had arranged the world, but he had not seen it. And now, the world he had so carefully arranged was gone. It had vanished in the space of 12 hours, beginning with a single phone call from a man he respected, the Oyabun of the Inagawa-kai, a partner from across the sea. The old man's voice was gravelly, laced with a pity that was worse than any threat. He had spoken 7 words, just 7. A house with no foundation is air. And with those words, a 40 billion won credit line, the very bedrock of Min-jun's largest legitimate enterprise, evaporated. The chase to understand why had now begun. By the way, wherever in the world you're watching from right now, let me know in the comments. I love seeing how far these stories reach. Okay, where were we? The chase had not yet felt like a chase. It had felt like an inconvenience. It began at the Apex Gala, the grand celebration for the completion of the Golden Phoenix Tower, the crown jewel of Min-jun's construction ambitions. The hall was a universe of black lacquer, gold leaf, and hushed deference. Light caught in the flutes of champagne, turning the bubbles into frantic ephemeral diamonds. The air was thick with the scent of money, a sterile perfume of success. Min-jun moved through it all with the placid, predatory grace of a shark in its own aquarium. He was a man of 42, built with the dense, coiled strength of his origins as a street enforcer, but now packaged in a bespoke tuxedo that cost more than the car he'd driven a decade ago. His face was a mask of controlled cordiality, his eyes missing nothing. Or so he believed. Every bow was measured, every handshake assessed. He was the center of this galaxy, and the lesser stars orbited him in predictable, respectful patterns. His lieutenants flanked him, but the one who truly mattered, the one who stood closest, was director Park Jin-woo. Park was everything Min-jun was not. Slender, elegant, his movements economical, his smile a precisely calibrated instrument. For 10 years, Park had been his right hand, the man who translated Min-jun's brutal visions into clean corporate strategy. "The Minister of Land and Infrastructures, please, Chairman," Park murmured, his voice a smooth ribbon of sound that never rose above a whisper. He mentioned the efficiency of the build was unprecedented. "Efficiency is a requirement, Director Park, not a compliment," Min-jun replied, his gaze sweeping the room. He accepted a glass of champagne from a passing waiter, his fingers barely brushing the server's glove. Every interaction was a performance of status. He was the chairman. He did not need to say thank you. The world said thank you to him. He saw the city's power brokers, the bankers whose money he put to work, the politicians whose careers he quietly subsidized, the rival bosses who came to pay their respects and measure him for weaknesses. He saw it all. He cataloged it all. He managed it all. His mind was a fortress of data, of names and numbers and obligations. He felt the familiar, cold satisfaction of absolute control. This was his world. He had built it. He had arranged it. And in all this polished splendor, the thought of his wife, Soo-jin, did not cross his mind. Not once. It was a practiced omission, a mental muscle exercised to the point of autonomic function. She had no place here. Her presence would be a dissonance, a disruption to the flawless narrative of his ascent. He had explained it to her years ago, in the early days of his rise. It was not personal, it was practical. This world, he had told her, gesturing vaguely at the life he was building, it runs on image, on the idea of perfection. It's a weakness, but it's the game. He had framed it as a strategic necessity, a burden he was shouldering. He had not framed it as shame, but they both knew it was. The gala wound down as all such events do, not with a bang, but with the quiet, sequential departure of the most important guests. Min-jun was the last of the true powers to leave. He gave a final, curt nod to Director Park, who was overseeing the tidying of the universe they had created for the evening. "A successful evening, Chairman," Park said, his head bowed at the perfect angle of respect. "Success is tomorrow's problem," Min-jun said. "Ensure the accounts are settled by dawn." "Of course, Chairman." The ride home was a silent glide through the electric canyons of Seoul. The city lights smeared against the tinted windows of the Mercedes, a river of fractured color. The driver, a silent man whose name Min-jun had never bothered to learn, navigated the streets with practiced smoothness. Min-jun leaned his head back against the cool leather. He felt the low-grade exhaustion that always followed these performances, the drain of maintaining the mask for hours on end. He anticipated the quiet of his penthouse, the one place the performance could be dropped. He anticipated Soo-jin. She would be awake, waiting for him in the small study she had made her own. She would have tea ready. She would ask him how the evening went, and her questions would not be the fawning queries of a subordinate, but the sharp, insightful probes of an analyst. She would want to know who seemed nervous, who seemed too confident, what deals were hinted at in the margins of conversations. She saw the things he missed, the human currents beneath the placid surface of power. He relied on that. He had folded her intelligence into his own operational awareness, taking it as a given, another asset at his disposal. The private elevator opened directly into the foyer of the penthouse. The first sign that something was wrong was the silence. It was a different kind of silence, not the peaceful quiet of a sleeping home, but the sterile, hollow silence of an empty one. The air was still, uncirculated. "Soo-jin," he called out. His voice was swallowed by the vast minimalist space, the white marble floors and towering glass walls. No answer. He walked through the living area, a space curated to look like a museum of modern design. It was immaculate, as always. But the immaculateness felt different tonight. It felt final. He moved down the long hallway toward their private quarters. The door to her study was slightly ajar. A sliver of warm light cut across the dark hallway. He pushed it open. The room was neat, obsessively so. Her desk, usually a controlled chaos of ledgers and files, was clear. Utterly clear. Except for one thing. In the precise center of the polished mahogany surface, resting on a single, folded sheet of white paper, was her wedding band. A simple, unadorned gold ring. It looked small and insignificant in the cavernous room. He felt a prickle of irritation. This was drama. He hated drama. It was inefficient. He picked up the ring, its familiar weight a strange anchor in his palm. He unfolded the paper. The note was not the long, emotional screed he might have expected. It was written in her perfect, clear script, the handwriting of an accountant. It said, "I have balanced the books. There was a deficit of attention. I am gone to find a surplus." That was it. No anger, no tears staining the page. Just a statement of fact. A deficit of attention. The phrase felt like an accounting term, a clinical diagnosis of their marriage. He read it again. He felt a surge of anger, not at her, but at the inconvenience. This was a problem to be managed. She would have gone to her mother's in Incheon. He would call her in the morning. He would be firm, remind her of her duties, and she would return. He had arranged it all in his head. It was a simple, domestic negotiation. He placed the ring and the note in his pocket, the problem filed away for the morning. He went to his own bedroom, the vast, cold space feeling even larger tonight, and slept the dreamless sleep of a man who believes he is still in control of his world. The world began to unravel at 6:05 a.m. The call was from Mr. Choi, the head of the consortium of bankers who had financed the Golden Phoenix Tower. His voice was tight with a fear that Min-jun had never heard from him before. Chairman Kang, there is a problem, a significant problem. The secondary financing agreements, they're being called in. Min-jun was instantly awake, the fog of sleep burned away by a jolt of adrenaline. What are you talking about, Choi? Those are 30-year notes. They contained a clause, Choi stammered. A guarantor's integrity clause. We all thought it was boilerplate, a formality. It was tied to the personal guarantee from the Inagawa Kai. They've withdrawn it. As of an hour ago, they have withdrawn their guarantee. Min-jun's mind raced. This was impossible. His relationship with the Oyabun was built on a decade of mutual profit and ironclad respect. On what grounds? They won't say. Just that circumstances have changed. Chairman, without their backing, our own risk models are flashing red. The entire capital structure is unstable. The investors are demanding their principal back. We have to suspend all further disbursements. Min-jun hung up, his knuckles white. He immediately dialed the Oyabun's private number in Tokyo. It was answered on the first ring by the old man's aide. There was a long pause. Min-jun could hear the faint sound of a television in the background. Then, the Oyabun's voice came on the line. It was not hostile. It was worse. It was disappointed. Kang-san, he said, the honorific feeling like a shard of glass. Oyabun, I am hearing things that make no sense. A 40 billion won guarantee vanished overnight? There was another pause. Min-jun could picture the old man in his Spartan room, sitting in seiza, looking out at a perfectly raked garden. It is not vanished, Kang-san. It is recalled. My trust was not in your steel and your glass. It was not in your political connections. My trust was in the woman who read the fine print. The woman who called my own accountant 2 years ago to point out a currency fluctuation risk in paragraph 27, subsection B, that would have cost us both millions. A detail my own people missed. Min-jun stood frozen. Soo-jin. The Oyabun continued, his voice soft. I asked my people to look into her. They found a woman of extraordinary prudence, a woman who paid attention. My trust was placed in her name, though yours was on the paper. I learned this morning that she is no longer with you. Therefore, my trust is no longer with you. It is that simple. Then came the 7 words that would haunt him, the words that broke the world open. A house with no foundation is air. The line went dead. Foundation. He looked around the penthouse, at the priceless art, the flawless finishes, the panoramic view of the city he owned. And for the first time, he felt like he was floating, unmoored, in a beautiful, fragile balloon. Before he could even process it, his phone rang again. It was the foreman from the port expansion project in Incheon, the syndicate's second largest venture. Chairman, we have a problem. The unions, the longshoremen, they're walking off the job. What? Min-jun barked. I have a no-strike agreement with Lee Jae-sung. He gave me his word. He says the agreement wasn't with you, sir. The foreman's voice was shaky. He says the agreement was with your wife. He said she was the one who guaranteed the pension fund adjustments and the family benefits package. He said, and these are his words, we made a deal with the mother, not the father. They won't come back until they speak with her. He hung up, the phone feeling slick in his hand. mother, foundation. He stumbled back into Sujin's study. The empty desk was no longer an inconvenience. It was an accusation. He saw it now. It wasn't just his books she kept. She was the foundation. She was the one who read the fine print, the one who spoke to the unions, the one who paid attention. The deficit she had written about was not in their marriage. It was in his entire empire. He had built a skyscraper on her shoulders, and for 7 years he had pretended she wasn't there. Now she had shrugged, and the building was coming down. The chase was on, not to bring her back, but to understand what exactly he had lost. The morning of full discovery began not with rage, but with a cold, terrifying clarity. The sun rose over Seoul, casting long shadows from the skyscrapers that dotted the skyline, each one a monument to ambition. From his penthouse, Min Jin could see the Golden Phoenix Tower, its glass and steel catching the first light, a beacon of a victory that now felt utterly hollow. He had not slept. He had sat in Sujin's chair, in her empty study, until the sky began to pale from black to a bruised purple. The 2 phone calls had been like depth charges, exploding far below the surface, but the shock waves had shattered the placid water of his world. He stood up and began to walk through the penthouse, but this time, he was not moving through his home. He was an archaeologist, sifting through the ruins of a life he had failed to understand. He started in her closet. He had always seen it as a space of quiet rebellion, a collection of simple, practical clothes that stood in stark contrast to the designer world he inhabited. He had felt a faint, unexamined contempt for it. Now, he saw it differently. He ran his hand over the fabrics. Sensible wools, soft cottons, durable denims. Clothes for a person who did things, who moved through the world with purpose, not for a person who was meant to be looked at. Tucked at the very back, behind a row of winter coats, was a single garment bag. He unzipped it. Inside was a dress. It was a deep emerald green, made of a heavy, lustrous silk. It was exquisitely tailored, elegant, and designed for a woman of substance, a woman who occupied her space with confidence. It was a dress for a queen. He had never seen it before. Tucked into a small pocket was a receipt from a bespoke dressmaker, dated 6 months ago. She had been preparing, not just to leave, but perhaps to arrive somewhere else. He moved from the closet to her bathroom. On the marble countertop, her space was clear. Her creams, her lotions, the simple, unscented soap she preferred, all gone. His own expensive imported products sat there, a lonely regiment of black and silver bottles. He had always thought of her lack of interest in cosmetics as another sign of her plainness. Now, he saw it as a sign of her focus. She was not interested in surfaces. She was interested in structures, in realities. He opened the medicine cabinet. His things were on the left, hers were on the right. Her side was empty, save for a single, small bottle of inexpensive aspirin. It was a detail so small, so mundane, it was devastating. She had left behind the cure for a common headache, as if to say the problems that remained were far beyond such simple remedies. He returned to her study, the epicenter of the earthquake. He began to do something he had never done before. He opened her drawers. He had always respected her privacy in this space, not out of courtesy, but because he had considered her work beneath his notice. It was bookkeeping. It was details. He was the strategist, the visionary. He dealt in power. She dealt in numbers. The top drawer contained stationery, pens, a collection of seals for various shell corporations he barely knew the names of. The second drawer, however, was different. It contained a series of slim, leather-bound journals. Not diaries filled with emotional confessions, but logs. Each was labeled by year. He opened the one for the current year. Her perfect, neat script filled the pages. It was a record of every significant interaction she had managed on his behalf. January 14th. Spoke with accountant for Inagawakai. Noticed currency exposure in Section 27B of the draft agreement. Advised Oyabun's office. They were grateful. M was busy with the groundbreaking ceremony. February 2nd. Met with E.J. Sung of the Port Union. Their pension fund is underperforming. The syndicate's official contribution is insufficient to guarantee solvency. Proposed a supplementary off-book benefits package funded from the Pan-Asian Logistics Slush Fund. He agreed. This secures the port for the next 5 years. M was in meetings with the minister. March 22nd. Received a call from the widow of Kim Min-soo, a driver killed in the turf war 3 years ago. Her son needs tuition for university. The official syndicate widows fund is a pittance, for show. I authorized a payment from the charitable holdings account. M was being fitted for a new suit. He sank back into her chair, the journal heavy in his lap. Page after page, it was the same story. While he was polishing the image, she was reinforcing the foundation. While he was performing power, she was quietly exercising it. She had built a shadow empire of trust and loyalty right under his nose. An empire that, it turned out, was the only one that was real. The deficit of attention. It wasn't a complaint. It was a diagnosis of his terminal blindness. He went to her computer. He had never touched it. He didn't know the password. He tried her birthday. Nothing. He tried his birthday. Nothing. He tried their anniversary. Nothing. Then, on a desperate whim, he typed the 7-character name of the small, forgotten restaurant where they had their first real conversation 20 years ago. The screen unlocked. The desktop was as clean as her desk. There was a single folder in the center of the screen. It was labeled Contingencies. His blood ran cold. This was not the act of a woman leaving in a fit of pique. This was the execution of a long-held plan. He opened the folder. It contained 3 files. The first was a detailed summary of the syndicate's true financial position, showing the legitimate fronts, the gray market operations, and the completely illegal enterprises. It was a document of terrifying clarity, a map of his entire world. But it was color-coded. The sections he directly controlled were marked in red. The sections she had managed, the ones built on her personal guarantees and meticulous oversight, were marked in green. The green sections accounted for over 60% of their net liquidity and almost all of their international credibility. The second file was an audio file. He clicked it. It was a recording of a phone call. He recognized Director Park's smooth, confident voice. But he was not speaking to Min-jun. He was speaking to someone else. Someone with a mainland Chinese accent. "The chairman is distracted," Park's voice said. "He is obsessed with the tower, with the galas. He sees the symbol, not the system. His wife, she is the one who watches the numbers. But she is isolated. He keeps her like a pet. Once she is out of the picture, the entire structure will be ours to dismantle. We can reroute the Incheon logistics revenue through the Macau accounts within 48 hours of her departure." Min-jun felt a wave of nausea. Park. His loyal Park. His efficient, deferential right hand. He was a viper, coiled at his feet for years, waiting. And Soo-jin had known. She had recorded it. The third file was a simple text document. It contained a single address and a name. An old traditional tea house in the Insadong district. The name was Master No, a man Min-jun knew only by reputation, a retired banker of unimpeachable integrity, a man who had moved money for 2 generations of the underworld and had never broken his word. The note on her desk had been a lie, or rather, a partial truth. She had not left to find a surplus of attention for herself. She had left to force him to finally pay attention to the rot within his own house. The trail was not one of abandonment. It was a curriculum, a brutal, remedial education in the art of seeing. He closed the laptop, the silence of the penthouse pressing in on him. The sun was fully up now, and the city was awake. His city. And he was a stranger in it. A king in a kingdom that had been secretly governed by his invisible queen. A queen who had just abdicated the throne to save the realm from his own trusted vizier. The story of their bond was not a romance. It was a transaction that had accidentally stumbled into something more, something he had failed to protect. They met 20 years ago, when he was not Chairman Kang, but simply Min Jun, a rising captain in the syndicate, a man known for his fists and his cold, strategic mind. He was 22, hungry, and utterly focused on his ascent. He had been sent to collect a debt from a small fabric merchant in the Dongdaemun market, a man whose business was failing. It was a routine task, a simple application of pressure. He had walked into the cramped shop, the air thick with the smell of dust and dying dreams. The old man was terrified, trembling behind a counter piled high with bolts of unsold cloth. Minjin was about to deliver his standard, chilling speech when a young woman emerged from the back room. She was not trembling. She was carrying a ledger. It was Sujin. She was 20, and she had a quiet, unshakable solidity. Her eyes, clear and intelligent, met his without fear. "My father is not a thief," she said, her voice even. "He is a poor businessman. There is a difference." She opened the ledger on the counter. "You are here for 10 million won. The principal was 5. The interest you charge is predatory, but it is the agreement he made." Her fingers, clean and unadorned, traced the columns of numbers. "We do not have 10 million won, but we do not have 0. Based on my accounting of your syndicate's other local interests, I can show you how a structured repayment, combined with our cooperation in storing and moving certain goods through this market, will be more profitable for you in the long run than breaking my father's legs." Minjun was taken aback. No one had ever spoken to him like this. They pleaded, they begged, they blustered. No one had ever presented him with a business proposal. He looked at the ledger. It was a work of art. Every transaction was perfectly recorded, every asset and liability accounted for. In the margins, she had made notes, projections, analysis of market trends. He saw in those pages a mind as sharp and strategic as his own, but applied to a different domain, the domain of order, of numbers, of reality. He spent an hour in that dusty shop, not threatening, but listening. She laid out a plan that was brilliant in its simplicity, a way to turn her family's debt into an asset for his faction of the syndicate. He saw her not as a woman, but as a weapon. A different kind of weapon than the knives and pipes his men carried, but far more dangerous. He left without collecting the debt. He went back to his boss and told him he had found a new way to manage the finances of their territory. He recruited Sujin. At first, it was purely professional. She worked out of the back room of her father's shop, turning their chaotic collection of extortion rackets and protection schemes into a coherent, profitable business. She created budgets. She tracked expenses. She identified waste and corruption within their own ranks. She made them richer, more efficient, and less visible to the law. Min Jun was captivated by her mind. Their meetings became the highlight of his week. They would sit in small, smoky restaurants, and while he spoke of power, of territory, of ambition, she would speak of systems, of structures, of sustainability. She saw the world as an intricate machine. He saw it as a battlefield. They were two halves of a single, formidable whole. He married her a year later. It was a practical decision, or so he told himself. Marrying her bound her to him, secured her loyalty and her talent exclusively for his use. His boss, the old chairman, had approved. "A man needs a clever wife," he had grunted. "Pretty ones are a distraction." The wedding was a small, private affair. In the pictures, he looked proud. She looked content. She wore a simple white dress she had made herself. She had never asked for more. For the first few years, they were a team, a true partnership. As he rose through the ranks, his power grew, and so did the scope of her work. She graduated from ledgers in a back room to managing a complex web of international investments and shell corporations. She never sought the spotlight. She seemed to prefer the shadows, the quiet hum of the machinery she so expertly controlled. He loved that about her. He loved her quiet competence, her utter lack of ego. He loved her. He was sure of it. The change began slowly, almost imperceptibly. It started when he finally became the chairman. The syndicate he inherited was no longer a mere street gang. It was a corporation. It had a board of directors, legitimate business arms, and a public face. And he was that face. He began to move in different circles, among the city's elite. He bought the penthouse. He started wearing bespoke suits. He learned about wine, about art, about the subtle language of old money. And he began to see his wife through their eyes. At a dinner with a banker, he saw the man's wife, a woman as polished and thin as a porcelain doll, give Soo-jin a brief, dismissive glance. At a political fundraiser, he noticed how the wives of the other powerful men formed a tight, exclusive circle, a circle Soo-jin was not invited into. He started to feel a prickle of something he had never felt before: shame. It was a vile, corrosive feeling, and he hated it. He hated the world for making him feel it, and he hated himself for feeling it. And, in a dark, unexamined corner of his heart, he began to resent Soo-jin for being the cause of it. The first time he asked her not to come was for a reception at the Japanese embassy. "It will be boring," he'd said, a clumsy lie. "All politicians and posturing, you'd hate it." She had just looked at him, her gaze steady, seeing right through the flimsy excuse. She didn't argue, she just nodded. "All right, Min-jin, I have some work to do anyway." It became the pattern. The galas, the openings, the international summits. He went alone. He constructed a public identity as a solitary, almost monastic figure, a man married only to his work. The lie was easier than the truth. The erasure was easier than the shame. He told himself it was for her own good, to shield her from the judgment of a shallow world. But he knew he was shielding himself. He was protecting his own fragile, newly acquired status. He was protecting the image. He had compartmentalized her. In the penthouse, she was his partner, his analyst, his confidant. The brilliant mind he relied on. Outside the penthouse, she did not exist. He had managed this contradiction for 7 years. He had believed it was a stable arrangement. He had not understood that you cannot cut a person in half and expect them to survive. You cannot honor a person's mind while dishonoring their body. He had created a deficit, not just of attention, but of respect, of wholeness. And now he was paying the price, with interest. The interest he was beginning to suspect was compounded daily. The tea house in Insadong was an island of old Korea in a sea of modern Seoul. It was called the Silent Leaf, and it was a small traditional hanok with a tiled roof and a quiet courtyard garden. The air inside smelled of aged wood, brewing tea, and something else, something like time itself. Min-jun, dressed in a simple dark suit, felt clumsy and oversized in the delicate space. He gave his name to a woman in a traditional hanbok who led him without a word through a series of paper-screened doors to a small private room. Inside, an old man sat on a cushion at a low table. This was Master No. He was thin and bird-like, with a fringe of white hair and skin as wrinkled as parchment. His eyes, however, were sharp and clear. He gestured for Minjun to sit. "Chairman Kang," he said. His voice was dry, like rustling leaves. "I have been expecting you." A young woman entered silently and began to prepare tea, her movements a slow, deliberate ritual. For several minutes, neither man spoke. They simply watched as she warmed the pot, measured the leaves, and poured the water. The only sound was the gentle trickle of water and the soft click of porcelain. Finally, Master No spoke. "Your wife is a remarkable woman." It was not a compliment, it was a statement of fact. "She came to me 3 years ago. She did not come for a loan. She came for knowledge. She wanted to understand the old ways of moving value, the systems built on trust, not on contracts, the systems your generation has forgotten." Minjun remained silent, his hands resting on his knees. He was here to listen. For the first time in a long time, he was not the one in charge. "She explained to me," Master No continued, "that the syndicate's finances were becoming too modern, too reliant on digital systems that could be traced, on international banks that could be pressured. She called it a single point of failure. She wanted to build redundancies, analog redundancies." He picked up his small teacup, cradling it in his hands. "Over 2 years I taught her. She absorbed it all. How to create value repositories in physical assets, how to use art, rare manuscripts, and precious metals as untraceable stores of wealth. How to build a network of custodians, men like me, whose word is their bond. She built a parallel financial system, a ghost account for the entire Golden Phoenix Syndicate, an emergency fund, a lifeboat." Master No took a slow sip of tea. She was not just protecting the syndicate from external threats. She was protecting it from internal ones. She suspected one of your own was preparing a betrayal. A man who was too smooth, too modern. A man who believed in digital theft, not in loyalty. Park Jin-woo. Of course. 2 months ago, Master No said, she made a final visit. She placed a significant portion of this lifeboat fund under my custodianship. Not in a bank, but in physical assets, stored in locations only I know. And she gave me this, for you. The old banker reached into the sleeve of his robe and pulled out a small, sealed envelope. It was made of heavy, cream-colored paper. Minjun's name was written on it in Sujin's script. He took it. The envelope was surprisingly heavy. "She said you would know what to do next," Master No said. "She also said to tell you something. She said, 'Tell him the foundation is not made of concrete. It is made of promises kept.' Do you understand, Chairman Kang?" "I am beginning to," Minjun said, his voice hoarse. He bowed deeply to Master No, a gesture of genuine respect he had not offered anyone in years. He left the tea house and walked out into the bustling streets of Insadong. He opened the envelope. Inside was not a letter, but a single, heavy, old-fashioned key and a slip of paper with an address. It was for a wharf in the port city of Busan, a place a world away from the gleaming towers of Seoul. The key was for a locker. The trail continued. He was being sent from the world of high finance to the world of gritty logistics, from the head of the beast to its belly. He was being forced to tour the kingdom his wife had secretly governed. The drive to Busan took 4 hours, a straight shot south on the Gyeongbu Expressway. Minjun drove himself. He had dismissed his driver, needing the solitude, the physical act of controlling the machine to process the unraveling of his reality. The highway was a blur of gray asphalt and green hillsides, a monotonous landscape that did little to quiet the storm in his mind. The words of Master No echoed, a man who was too smooth, too modern. Park. The betrayal was so obvious in hindsight, it made him physically ill. He had mistaken Park's ambition for loyalty, his deference for respect. He had seen the performance, and like a fool at a magic show, he had believed it was real. He arrived at the port of Busan as the afternoon sun was beginning to dip toward the horizon, casting the massive container cranes in long, skeletal shadows. The air was salty and smelled of diesel fuel and brine. This was the heart of his logistical empire, the artery through which his legitimate and illegitimate goods flowed. He had been here before, of course, for formal inspections, striding along the docks surrounded by nervous managers, a king surveying his domain. Today, he was just a man with a key. The address led him to Wharf 7, a grimy, working section of the port, far from the new automated terminals. The key was for a locker in the longshoreman's break room, a shabby building that smelled of stale coffee and sweat. The men inside, tough, weathered figures in work clothes, watched him with open curiosity but not hostility. He was out of place in his expensive suit, but the key in his hand seemed to be a passport of sorts. He found the locker, number 42. It opened with a rusty click. Inside was another sealed envelope, and beside it, a battered copy of a book. It was a collection of old Korean folk tales. He took them both and was about to leave when a man blocked his path. He was broad and powerfully built, his face a roadmap of wrinkles and old scars. Min Jun recognized him from union negotiation files. This was Lee Jae-sung, the head of the Busan Port Union. "You must be Chairman Kang," Lee said. His voice was a low rumble. He wasn't looking at Min Jun with defiance, but with a kind of weary appraisal. "I am," Min Jun said. "She said you might come," Lee said, gesturing with his chin toward the locker. "Your wife. We called her the accountant. She was the only one from your organization who ever came down here without bodyguards. The only one who sat with us and drank soju from a paper cup." Min Jun felt a fresh pang of shame. He had always sent subordinates to deal with the unions. It was beneath him. 2 years ago, Lee continued, his eyes fixed on Min Jun's. "We were going to strike, a real strike, one that would have shut down this whole coast. Your people wanted to cut our benefits, automate half our jobs. You were building your fancy tower in Seoul, and you were going to pay for it out of our pockets." Lee spat on the ground. "We were ready for a war. Then she came. Alone. She sat in this very room for 6 hours. She didn't make threats. She didn't make speeches. She had our pension ledgers with her. She showed us the numbers. She showed us where the money was going. She admitted your plans were unfair. And then she proposed a new deal." He paused, a flicker of something like wonder in his eyes. "She created a new benefits package, not on the company books, but a private one, funded from an account I'd never heard of. She guaranteed our jobs. She guaranteed our families would be cared for. She didn't ask for a new contract. She just asked for our word. She said, 'My husband builds with steel. I prefer to build with men. Steel can break. A promise made to a man's family cannot.'" Lee Jae-sung looked Min Jun up and down. "We gave her our word. Our loyalty is not to the Golden Phoenix Syndicate. It is to her. So when we heard she was gone, we stopped work. Our promise was to her, not to you." Min Jun finally understood the foreman's message from that morning. We made a deal with the mother, not the father. It wasn't an insult. It was a statement of allegiance. "What was in the envelope?" Lee asked. Min-jun opened it. It contained a shipping manifest from 6 months prior. A container, officially listed as carrying machine parts to Shanghai, was highlighted. Next to it, Su Jin had written a note. "This container was logged by your director Park. It never left the port. Its contents were rerouted to a private warehouse. The warehouse is owned by a shell company. The company is owned by Park Jin-woo." It was hard evidence, a piece of the puzzle of Park's treachery. "Where do I go next?" Min-jun asked, his voice quiet. Lee pointed to the book of folk tales in Min-jun's hand. She said the answer was in the story of the sun and the moon. Min-jun found the story. It was a classic tale of a brother and sister who escape a tiger and become the sun and the moon. Tucked into the page where the story began was a small folded piece of paper. It held the third and final address. It was not a bank or a port. It was a monastery in the mountains of Gyeongsang Province. And a name. The abbot, Jin-song. He was being sent from the world of money and the world of labor to the world of the spirit. Each stop was a lesson. The banker had taught him about the true nature of wealth. The union boss had taught him about the true nature of loyalty. He had a sickening feeling he knew what the abbot would teach him about. The cost. The human cost of his ambition. A cost his wife had been secretly paying on his behalf. The monastery, Haeinsa, was nestled in a remote valley in the Gaya Mountains. It was ancient, a place of profound peace, the crisp mountain air a stark contrast to the grime of Busan's port. The journey had been another long, solitary drive, giving him more time to reflect on the man Lee Jae-sung had described. A man who sat with workers and drank soju from paper cups. A man who built with promises. A man whose wife he had hidden from the world. He was not just following a trail. He was chasing the ghost of a person he had lived with for 20 years, but had never truly known. He was met at the monastery gates by a young monk who led him through a series of courtyards, past silent, bowing figures in gray robes. The abbot, Jin-song, was waiting for him in a small library, a room lined with thousands of ancient woodblock prints, the famous Tripitaka Koreana. The air smelled of old paper and incense. The abbot was an elderly man, his face serene and deeply lined, his eyes holding a wisdom that felt centuries old. "Chairman Kang," the abbot said, his voice a gentle murmur. "Your wife has spoken of you." "What did she say?" Min-jun asked, feeling like a child before a teacher. "She said you were a man who could build anything, except a bridge to the people who held you up," the abbot replied, his gaze unwavering. "She came here over a year ago. She was troubled. She told me the syndicate, in its pursuit of power, was leaving behind a trail of forgotten souls. The widows of men who died in your service. The children of loyal soldiers who were cast aside. The families left with nothing when your consolidation of power made their fathers redundant." Min-jun felt a cold dread creep up his spine. The syndicate had a fund for this, a formal, paltry pension system. It was a cost of doing business, managed by his administrative department. He had never given it a second thought. "The official fund was a disgrace," the abbot said, as if reading his mind. "An insult. Your wife knew this, so she created her own. She called it the Lantern Fund, because she said its purpose was to leave a light on for those left in the dark." The abbot gestured to a set of lacquered cabinets against the far wall. "She used this monastery as her administrator. She would send us funds, untraceable donations from her charitable holdings account, and she would send us names, a list of families. We would then disperse the money, tuition for children, medical care for the elderly, down payments for small homes, a safety net, woven from her own private resources and her profound sense of justice." He had known nothing about this. While he was buying art for the penthouse and commissioning new suits, she was funding the education of his dead soldiers' children. The thought was so staggering, so profoundly shaming, he felt dizzy. She was protecting them, the abbot said softly. But she was also protecting you. She was balancing a moral ledger you were not even aware you were overdrawn on. She believed that an organization that did not care for its own was doomed to collapse from within. It would rot from the soul outward. The abbot walked over to one of the cabinets and opened it. Inside were not religious texts, but dozens of neat, meticulously organized files. He pulled one out. This is the complete record of the Lantern Fund. Every payment, every family, every life you touched without knowing it. He handed the file to Minjun. And this, she left this for you as well. It was a small external hard drive. She said this was the final piece, the complete picture of the rot. She said that after seeing this, you would know where to find her. Minjun took the hard drive. His journey was over. He had followed the trail from the heights of finance to the depths of human loyalty, and finally to the core of moral responsibility. He had been stripped of his arrogance, his ignorance, his pride. He was left with nothing but the cold, hard truth of his failure. He bowed to the abbot, a deeper, more profound bow than he had given Master No. "Thank you, Master," he whispered. The abbot simply placed a hand on his shoulder. "Do not thank me. Your wife built the bridge. She is waiting to see if you are willing to walk across it." Minjun left the monastery and drove to the nearest anonymous motel. He plugged the hard drive into his laptop, the same laptop on which he had found the first clues. The drive contained a single, password-protected folder. He thought for a moment, then typed the name of the emerald green dress he had found in her closet, the Queen's dress. The folder opened. It was an archive of pure, irrefutable truth. It contained everything. Financial records, cross-referenced and annotated, showing a systematic, multi-year embezzlement scheme orchestrated by Park Jin-woo. He had been siphoning off a small percentage of every major transaction, a digital death by 1,000 cuts, funneling the money into offshore accounts and converting it into cryptocurrency. The total was staggering, nearly 100 billion won, enough to build a rival empire. But it was more than just financial data. There were audio recordings, like the one he'd heard before, but many more. Park speaking with rivals, with corrupt politicians, with triad leaders in Macau. Park meticulously planning the syndicate's downfall and his own ascension. There were surveillance photographs of Park meeting with the people he was supposed to be fighting. There were copies of encrypted messages, a complete shadow correspondence that laid his betrayal bare. Soo-jin had built a case, a prosecution. She had been watching Park for years, gathering evidence with the patient, methodical precision of a master detective. She had not come to Minjun with her suspicions because she knew he wouldn't believe her. He was too blinded by Park's performance of loyalty. He would have seen her concerns as jealousy or paranoia. So she had worked alone, in secret, building an unshakable mountain of proof. The final subfolder was labeled The Coup. It contained a detailed timeline of Park's plan. He intended to use the chaos of the Inagawa Kai pulling their funding, a chaos he had likely anticipated, to call an emergency meeting of the syndicate's captains. He would paint Minjun as incompetent, a man who had lost his grip. He would use the frozen assets and stalled projects as proof. Then, with a combination of bribes and threats, he would have himself declared the new chairman. The plan was elegant, ruthless, and very, very close to succeeding. The depth and scope of the betrayal were breathtaking. Park had not just been a thief. He had been a saboteur, a ghost in the machine, actively working to destroy it from within. And Minjun had not only missed it, he had enabled it. He had created the perfect environment for Park's treachery to flourish. His obsession with image, his galas, his public performances, they were not just distractions. They were the cover Park needed to operate. Minjun's vanity had been Park's greatest weapon. As he scrolled through the last of the files, a single document caught his eye. It was a property deed, a small, simple cottage on the coast near Gangneung, on the East Sea. It had been purchased 6 months ago, in her name. There was a handwritten note at the bottom of the scanned document. The tide comes in and the tide goes out. It washes the shore clean. I will be waiting by the water. He finally knew where she was. Not hiding, but waiting. She had given him the map to his own kingdom, exposed the traitor in his court, and now she was waiting to see what he would do with the truth. Would he be the man who had lost it all, or the man who was willing to earn it back? He closed the laptop. The motel room was cheap and smelled of disinfectant, but for the first time in days, he felt a sliver of hope. The hope was not that he could fix things, but that he had been given a chance to try. The chase was over. The reckoning had begun. The cottage was exactly as he had imagined it, small, weathered, and perched on a quiet stretch of coastline far from the tourist-clogged beaches. The sea was a vast expanse of gray-blue under an overcast sky, the waves washing onto the shore with a steady, rhythmic hush. It was a place of peace, a world away from the frantic energy of Seoul. He parked the car and walked to the front door, his heart pounding a slow, heavy rhythm against his ribs. He felt a profound sense of trepidation, the fear of a man about to face his judge. He knocked. The door opened, and there she was. Kim Soo-jin looked rested. That was the first word that came to his mind. The perpetual tension he had grown used to seeing in her shoulders was gone. She was wearing simple linen trousers and a soft gray sweater. Her hair was tied back loosely, and her face was free of makeup. She was not smiling, but her expression was calm, her eyes clear and steady. She looked at him, and for the first time, he felt she was seeing all of him, the broken king standing on her doorstep. "Minjun," she said. Her voice was the same, quiet and even, but it held a new note of authority. The authority of a person who had reclaimed her own center. "Soo-jin," he said, his own voice raspy. She stepped aside, a silent invitation to enter. The inside of the cottage was as simple and clean as the outside. It was furnished sparsely but comfortably, with books piled on tables and a large, unfinished jigsaw puzzle spread across a low table in front of the window. The air smelled of salt and old wood. It felt like her. It felt real. "You found me," she said. It wasn't a question. "You wanted me to," he replied, standing awkwardly in the middle of the room. She nodded, gesturing for him to sit in one of the simple wooden chairs. She remained standing, looking out the window at the sea. The power dynamic was utterly inverted. In their penthouse, he had been the one who paced while she sat. Here, she was the one in command of the space. "Did you visit the custodians?" she asked. "I did. Master No, Lee Jae-sung, the abbot Jinsung." He recited the names like a penitent. "I saw the archive." And I saw that I was blind," he said, the admission costing him more than any business deal he had ever made. "I saw that Park has been robbing me for years, and you knew. I saw that you were the one holding everything together, the finances, the unions, the families, all of it. I saw that the foundation the Oyabun spoke of was you." She turned from the window to face him. There was no triumph in her eyes, only a deep, abiding sorrow. "I did not do it for you, Minjun. Not entirely. I did it for the people who depend on the syndicate, for the families the abbot cares for the workers on the docks. They deserved better than to have their lives ruined because their chairman was more concerned with the shine on his shoes than the security of his house. The words were a physical blow. He flinched. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked, the question sounding weak even to his own ears. "About Park. Why didn't you show me the evidence?" A faint, sad smile touched her lips. "Would you have believed me? Or would you have believed your loyal, efficient Director Park, the man who told you everything you wanted to hear? The man who mirrored your own ambition? I would have been a jealous wife, a paranoid woman meddling in affairs she didn't understand. You would have defended him. You would have told me to go back to my ledgers. Am I wrong?" He couldn't answer, because she was right. He would have. The thought was a fresh wave of shame. "So I made a choice," she continued, her voice gaining a hard, clinical edge. "I could not protect the syndicate from within the cage you had built for me. The invisible cage of the penthouse, the cage of being your secret. So I had to leave. I had to let a part of the structure collapse to force you to see the rot. I had to burn down a part of the forest to save the whole." She walked over to a small desk in the corner and picked up a folder. "I had 2 plans, Minjun. Contingencies, as my file was labeled. Plan A was this. I disappear. The parts of the empire I control go with me. The credit lines freeze, the unions walk. You are forced to follow the trail I left. You are forced to see the truth of what I did and the truth of what Park did. You are humbled, you learn, and you come here, to this cottage, a different man, a man ready to listen." "And Plan B?" he asked, his throat dry. "Plan B was if you failed the test," she said, her eyes like chips of ice. "If you came here with threats and anger. If you still saw me as a possession to be retrieved. In that case, this folder," she held it up, "which contains a single copy of the hard drive you now have, would have been delivered to the National Prosecutor's Office, and a second copy to the Oyabun. The Golden Phoenix Syndicate would cease to exist by the end of the month. Park would go to prison, and so would you. I would have taken the remnants of the Lantern Fund and disappeared, to continue caring for the families from afar." He stared at her, stunned into silence. She had planned for his redemption, but she had also meticulously planned for his destruction. It was the most ruthless and the most merciful thing he had ever seen. "You are here," she said, placing the folder back on the desk, "which means we are on the path of Plan A, for now. But the clock is ticking. According to the timeline I uncovered, Park will make his move within the next 48 hours. He will call a meeting of the captains and declare you unfit." She looked at him, her gaze analytical, assessing. "The man who walked in here cannot defeat him. That man is a symbol, an image, and his image is now shattered. But the man you were 20 years ago, the man who listened to a proposal in a dusty fabric shop, he might be able to." She came and sat in the chair opposite him, leaning forward. For the first time, they were equals, 2 strategists planning a campaign. "So, the question is, Chairman Kang," she said, using his title with a deliberate, cutting irony, "what do we do now?" The word "we" hung in the air between them. It was a lifeline he did not deserve, but it was the only one he had. "We fight him," Minjin said, his voice finding a new resolve. "Not on my terms. On yours." The countermove began not with a flurry of threats, but with a series of quiet, deliberate phone calls. The cottage became their war room. Sujin, who had spent years in the shadows, was now the commanding general. Minjun, the chairman who had commanded legions with a single nod, was now the soldier in the field, executing her strategy. The irony was not lost on him. "We cannot fight Park with force," Sujin said, her focus absolute. She had a map of the syndicate's power structure spread out on the table. Not a formal chart, but one she had drawn from memory, connecting names with lines of influence, loyalty, and greed. He expects that. He wants you to lash out like a wounded animal. That will only prove his point that you are unstable. We have to dismantle his power base before he can consolidate it. We have to fight him with procedure, with truth. Her strategy had 3 fronts. First, the money. Second, the allies. Third, the law. Master No is our first call, she instructed. The lifeboat fund he holds is our weapon. You will authorize him to do something unprecedented. You will have him contact the syndicate's 10 most senior captains, the ones whose loyalty is uncertain. He will inform them that a significant portion of their own personal wealth, which they believe is in standard accounts, was moved by me into his custodianship over the last year to protect it. He will offer to return it to them immediately with a small dividend from the fund's investments, a gesture of good faith. Minjun stared at her. You took their money without telling them? I protected their money when you could not, she corrected him calmly. It was a risk, but I gambled that their greed and relief would outweigh their anger at the intrusion. This will do 2 things. It will prove that I, and by extension you, are still in control of the deep assets. And it will give them a reason to pause before backing Park, who can only offer them promises. We will offer them cold, hard cash. Minjun made the call. Master No, after a long, silent pause, simply said, The accountant is a brilliant woman. Consider it done. The second front was the allies. Lee Jae-sung, Sujin said, pointing to his name on her hand-drawn map. The unions are your army if you can command them, but you cannot command them with orders. You must command them with respect. You will call him. You will tell him the truth about Park. You will tell him that Park's plan involves replacing the union workers with non-union labor from the mainland to cut costs. You will show him the proof from the archive. And you will make him a promise. You will promise to personally oversee the ratification of the benefits package I designed, writing it into the syndicate's official charter. You will make the off-book deal legitimate. He made the call. Lee Jae-sung listened without interruption. When Minjun was finished, the union boss grunted. She built with men. She was right. The port is yours, Chairman. Let us know when you need the gates closed. The third front was the most elegant, the most like her. The law, Sujin said, her eyes glinting. Park believes he is above it. He has politicians in his pocket. But he is not above international banking regulations. The evidence on the hard drive shows clear violations of anti-money laundering statutes, specifically the FATF travel rule regarding cryptocurrency transfers. He used accounts in Singapore and Switzerland. He is vulnerable to their laws, not ours. She gave him a name and a number. A woman at the financial regulator's office in Seoul, a deputy director. Her name is Im Yuna. I have had a quiet correspondence with her for a year, not as the chairman's wife, but as an anonymous informant. I have been feeding her information about systemic corruption in the construction sector. She is honest, and she is ambitious. You will send her a single encrypted file from the archive, the one detailing Park's crypto transfers. It will be enough to trigger an international investigation. It will put a flag on his name in every major financial institution in the world. He won't be able to move his stolen money. We will cage him with the very digital systems he sought to master. One by one, Minjun executed her commands. He was no longer the chairman giving orders from on high. He was an operator, working the phones, sending the messages, his voice measured and calm, his tone humble and direct. He was using his authority not as a hammer, but as a key, unlocking the doors Soo-jin had already put in place. As he worked, he felt a strange sense of liberation. He was shedding the skin of the infallible chairman and rediscovering the man he had been before. The sharp, hungry captain who understood that power was not about performance, but about results. They worked through the day and into the night. The cottage, filled with the low murmur of their voices and the glow of the laptop screen, felt more like the heart of his empire than the opulent penthouse ever had. He would make a call, report back to her, and she would give him the next instruction, her mind moving 3 steps ahead of everyone else. She was not just his wife, she was his partner, his strategist, his queen. A queen he had tried to hide, and who was now saving his kingdom. As dawn approached, his phone rang. It was one of his loyal captains, a man named Cho, who had not wavered. "Chairman, it's happening. Park has called the meeting, noon tomorrow, at the Grand Hyatt. He's claiming you've abandoned your post, that you're mentally unstable. He's promising to restore order. The captains are spooked. The ones you had Master No call, they are quiet. They are waiting to see who is stronger." The endgame had begun. They had laid the groundwork, but Park was making his final decisive move. He was forcing a confrontation. "He's moving faster than I expected," Soo-jin said, her expression hardening. "He knows we're coming for him. He's decided to go for a direct seizure of power rather than a slow erosion. He's betting that his physical presence and the force of his personality can overwhelm the seeds of doubt we've planted." This was the lateral surprise. Park wasn't running, he was attacking. He was turning the syndicate's own traditions against Minjun, using the ancient structure of a council of captains to legitimize a coup. "He's created a ticking clock," Minjun said, the arithmetic stark and brutal in his mind. "We have less than 30 hours to turn a handful of wavering captains into a solid wall against him." Soo-jin looked at him, her gaze intense. "No, Minjun. You have 30 hours. I have brought you this far. I have given you the weapons. But you are the one they know as chairman. You have to be the one to walk into that room. You have to be the one to face him. The question is, will you walk in there alone?" He looked at her, at this incredible woman who had seen everything, planned for everything, the woman he had erased. "No," he said, his voice raw with an emotion he could no longer suppress. "I will not, if you will come with me." A long silence stretched between them. The only sound was the distant crash of the waves. Finally, she gave a single sharp nod. "Then we have work to do. We have to consume the clock." The next 30 hours were a masterclass in pressure and precision. The strategy shifted from setting traps to active persuasion, a desperate, high-stakes campaign to win the hearts and minds of the wavering captains before Park's meeting. The arithmetic was brutal. Park needed a simple majority of the 12 captains to declare Minjun unfit. 3 were loyal to Minjun, 2 were solidly in Park's pocket. That left 7 undecided votes. They needed to secure 4 of them. "We can't reach them all," Soo-jin said, her voice clipped and efficient. She was pacing the small cottage, a general on the eve of battle. "We don't have time. We have to focus on the pivots, the ones the others watch." She circled 3 names on her map. Captain O, a cautious older man who controlled the syndicate's gambling operations. Captain Moon, a hot-headed but respected enforcer from the old school. And Captain Bay, a young, ambitious man who ran their burgeoning private security arm. Win them, and the others will fall in line. The clock consumption gambit began. Minjun, with Soo-jin listening to every call on speakerphone, began his offensive. He was no longer the distant chairman. He was Minjun, the man they had once followed into battle. His first call was to Captain O, the gambler. Oh, 형님, Minjun began, using the respectful term for an older brother, a word he had not used for this man in years. It is Kang Minjun. There was a surprised silence. Chairman, we heard you were unwell. I was blind, Hyungnim, not unwell, Minjun said, his voice stripped of all arrogance. And my blindness allowed a thief into our house. His name is Park Jin-woo. He didn't shout, he didn't threaten. He laid out the facts, calmly and precisely. He told O about the siphoned funds, about the secret meetings with rivals. He explained that the frozen assets were not a sign of his failure, but a part of Park's deliberate sabotage. He promises you order, Minjun continued. But what he will bring is collapse. He has no loyalty to our ways. He sees the syndicate as a bank to be robbed. I am asking for your trust, not because I am chairman, but because I am the man who remembers the promises we made to the old boss. Park remembers nothing. These are serious accusations, Minjun, O said, his voice still cautious. They are, Minjun replied, and I have the proof. But more than that, I have my wife. The woman who has been managing our true wealth while I was distracted by shiny buildings. She is the one who uncovered this. She is the one who secured your personal funds with Master No. The money that appeared in your account this morning, that was her work. Ask yourself who you trust more, the man who promises you a future or the woman who just secured your present. He hung up, leaving O with the question. He had given him facts, but he had also given him a choice based on tangible reality. Next was Captain Moon, the enforcer. This required a different approach. Moon, Minjun said, his voice hard, direct. Park is a snake. He made deals with the triads in Macau who killed 2 of your men last year. I have the recording of the call. He sold them out for a piece of their action. Prove it, Moon growled. I'll do better than that, Minjun said. I'll let you be the one to deliver the justice he deserves. Stand with me tomorrow, and his fate is in your hands. He was appealing not to Moon's reason, but to his honor and his thirst for vengeance. It was a language Moon understood perfectly. The final and most difficult call was to Bae, the young, ambitious captain. He saw himself in Bae, a younger version of his own hungry self. Park would have appealed to that ambition, promising him a higher position. Bae, Minjun started, I know what Park has offered you. My seat, eventually. A place at the head of the table. He's selling you a dream. It's a better dream than the nightmare we're in now, Chairman, Bae retorted, his voice sharp. Our projects are stalled. Our money is frozen. You disappeared. I did not disappear. I went to find the truth, Minjun said. He took a breath, Sujin giving him a slight nod. Park's way is the way of the spreadsheet. He sees men as numbers, assets to be leveraged or discarded. I know because for a time, I started to see the same way. And I was wrong. The strength of this family is not in its bank accounts. It is in its people. The men on the docks, the families of our soldiers. My wife, she reminded me of that. She is the one who has been protecting them, protecting us. Park would sell them all for a profit margin. Is that the kind of leader you want to follow? He paused, letting the words sink in. Stay with me, and you will have your chance to rise. But you will rise on a foundation of strength and loyalty, not on the ruins of a house deliberately burned. You will earn your place, not steal it. He finished the call, exhausted but resolute. They had planted the seeds. Now, they could only wait and see if they would bear fruit. The morning of the meeting, a black car sent by the loyal Captain Cho arrived at the cottage. Minjun emerged, dressed in a simple, dark, perfectly tailored suit. He looked like the chairman again, But his eyes were different. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a grim determination. Then, the car door opened again, and Soo-jin stepped out. She was wearing the emerald green silk dress. It fit her perfectly, a sheath of quiet power. She wore no jewelry except for the simple gold wedding band which she had slipped back on her finger. She was not standing behind him. She was standing beside him, the queen, visible at last. They arrived at the Grand Hyatt and were escorted to the private suite where the council was gathering. The air was thick with tension. The 12 captains were seated around a massive circular table, a modern-day round table for a kingdom in crisis. Park Jin-woo was at the head of the table, in the chairman's seat. He looked calm, confident, every inch the leader. When he saw Min-jin enter, his eyes widened slightly in surprise. When he saw Soo-jin beside him, his composure cracked for a fraction of a second. It was a flicker of disbelief, quickly masked. "Chairman Kang," Park said, his voice smooth as silk. "And, madam, we are surprised to see you. We had feared for your well-being." Min-jun did not answer. He walked slowly around the table, his gaze meeting each captain's. He could feel their uncertainty, their fear. He walked until he was standing directly behind the chairman's chair, directly behind Park. Soo-jin stood a few feet away, her presence a silent, powerful statement. "This is my seat," Min-jun said, his voice quiet but carrying the weight of 20 years of authority. Park gave a small, pitying smile. "With respect, Chairman, you have abdicated it. Your erratic behavior, the collapse of our finances, the captains have gathered to restore stability." "The only instability in this room," Min-jun said, his voice rising slightly, "is the man sitting in my chair, a thief and a traitor." A murmur went around the table. "These are the desperate words of a fallen man," Park said, addressing the captains. "He has lost his mind." "Have I?" Min-jun said. He looked at Captain Oh. "Oh Hyung-nim, did a man who has lost his mind arrange for Master No to secure your wealth?" He looked at Captain Moon. "Did a man who has lost his mind uncover the truth of who betrayed your men in Macau?" He looked at Captain Bay. "Did a man who has lost his mind see the difference between ambition and treason?" Then he did something no one expected. He gestured to Soo-jin. "For 7 years I have been a fool. I have paraded myself as the architect of our success, while the true architect stood in the shadows. I hid her from you, and in doing so, I hid her wisdom from our entire family. That was my failure, a failure of sight, a failure of honor." He looked directly at Park. "And it was that failure that allowed this snake to flourish. He used my vanity as his shield. While I was at galas, my wife, Kim Soo-jin, was balancing our books. While I was making speeches, she was making promises to our men. While I was building towers of glass, she was reinforcing our foundation of loyalty. She saw the rot in this man when I saw only a reflection of myself." Soo-jin stepped forward. She placed a single, slim hard drive on the table. "This contains all the evidence of Director Park's crimes against this family," she said, her voice clear and strong. "His embezzlement, his collusion with our enemies, his plan to sell this syndicate piece by piece to the highest bidder. You do not have to believe my husband. You do not have to believe me. You only have to believe the truth." Park's face had gone pale. His composure was gone, replaced by a mask of cold fury. "This is a lie, a fabrication by a jealous woman and a failed leader." At that moment, Captain O, the cautious gambler, slowly stood up. He looked at Park, then at Min-jun and Soo-jin. He gave a short, formal bow. "I stand with Chairman Kang." Then Captain Moon, the enforcer, stood up, a grim smile on his face. I stand with the chairman." Then Bay, the young captain, after a moment's hesitation, rose to his feet. "With the chairman." One by one, the other wavering captains stood. In less than a minute, 10 of the 12 captains were standing, a solid wall of restored loyalty. Park Jin-woo was left sitting at the head of the table, alone, his face a ruin of disbelief and fury. His support had not just cracked, it had evaporated. The coup had failed. The collapse was swift and silent. Park did not rage or fight. He simply seemed to shrink in the chairman's chair. The loyal Captain Cho and 2 of his men stepped forward. They did not draw weapons. They simply stood behind Park. The message was clear. It was over. "Take him," Min-jun ordered, his voice cold. "Hold him." Later that day, Captain Cho's intelligence operator, a quiet man who specialized in finding people who didn't want to be found, located Park's escape route. He wasn't in a rival fortress or a private jet. His assets had been frozen by the international flags Soo-jin had triggered. His stolen cryptocurrency was locked in exchanges that had suddenly become unresponsive. He had a bag of cash and a fake passport, and he was found in a cheap, hourly rate motel near the airport, a place of profound anonymity and failure. Min-jun received the call in the penthouse, where he and Soo-jin had returned. The opulent space felt different now, charged with a new reality. "What are your orders, Chairman?" Captain Cho asked. "Captain Moon is eager to have a word with him." Min-jun looked at Soo-jin. She was standing by the large window, looking out at the city. He walked over to her. He didn't ask her what to do. He simply stood beside her, looking out at the same view. He had learned, finally, that some decisions had to be his own, born of the lessons he had been so brutally taught. "No," he said into the phone. "There will be no more killing, not for this. He is a thief, not a martyr. Strip him of everything, his name, his assets, his position, erase him from our history. Then let him go. Let him live with the knowledge of what it is to have everything and be left with nothing. That is a fate worse than death for a man like him." He hung up. He had chosen restraint over rage, a quiet erasure over a noisy execution. It was a choice the old Min-jun would have mocked, but the old Min-jun was gone. In the weeks that followed, the syndicate stabilized with a speed that surprised everyone but him. The Inagawa-kai, upon hearing the full story from Min-jun himself, reinstated their credit line. The Oyabun had only one comment. "A man who learns to see his own foundation is a man worth trusting." The unions, with their new contract officially ratified, worked with an efficiency and loyalty the port had never seen. The captains, now unified, fell in line. Their respect for Min-jun, now deeper than before, mingled with a new, profound respect for his wife. The name, the accountant, became a legend within the organization, a quiet testament to the true nature of power. The institutional restoration was complete. The innocent had been protected, the traitor exiled, the estranged partners reconciled. But one thing remained, a public debt, a public sin that required a public correction. The opportunity came a month later, at a high-profile charity dinner for an orphanage, an event that drew the same powerful crowd as the Apex Gala. As the chairman of the Golden Phoenix, one of the primary sponsors, Min-jun was expected to give a speech. As he walked toward the stage, he saw the same faces, the same polished smiles, the same calculating eyes, the world of images. He stood at the podium, the lights hot on his face. A speech, written by his communications team, sat on the lectern. He looked at it for a moment, at the carefully crafted words about corporate responsibility and philanthropy. Then he pushed it aside. "Good evening," he began, his voice clear and steady, carrying across the silent, cavernous ballroom. A little over a month ago, many of us were at a similar event, celebrating the opening of my company's new tower. We celebrated an image of success, a symbol of power. Tonight, I am not here to talk about symbols. I am here to talk about foundations. A ripple of confusion went through the audience. For many years, he continued, his gaze sweeping the room, I have presented myself to you as a self-made man, a solitary architect of my own fortune. That was a lie. It was a lie born of pride and of a profound blindness for which I am deeply ashamed. He looked across the room to a table near the front. Soo-jin sat there, wearing a simple, elegant black dress. She was watching him, her expression unreadable. The truth is, the entire foundation of my success, the stability of my organization, and the very honor of my name rests on the work of one person, a person of extraordinary intelligence, integrity, and courage. A person I have, to my great shame, kept hidden from this world because I was a fool, more concerned with shallow appearances than with true strength. That person is my wife, Kim Soo-jin. He gestured to her. A spotlight found her. She did not shrink from it. She met its glare with the same calm poise she had shown in the cottage, in the war room, at the Council of Captains. She is not just my wife, Min-jin said, his voice thick with an emotion he no longer tried to hide. She is the strategist who secured our finances. She is the diplomat who earned the loyalty of our people. She is the guardian who protected the forgotten and exposed the corrupt. She is the foundation upon which everything I have ever built stands. I am the chairman of the Golden Phoenix Syndicate, but she is its heart and its mind. He looked directly at her. I publicly dishonored her with my silence. Tonight, I publicly honor her with the truth. Any respect you have for me is owed to her. Any success my name carries is a reflection of her brilliance. He stepped back from the podium. There was a moment of stunned silence, and then, slowly, a wave of applause began, growing until it filled the entire hall. It was not the polite, obligatory applause of such events. It was real. It was for her. She had walked into the biggest event of all, not alone, but brought into the light by the very man who had cast the shadow. Later that night they were home. The penthouse was quiet. The vast windows showed a city glittering with a million lights. The victory felt distant, the public declaration a necessary but insufficient gesture. The real work, the hard work, was here, in this room, between the two of them. Soo-jin was standing by the window, her back to him. He came and stood beside her, a familiar posture that now felt entirely new. "Thank you, Min-jin," she said softly. "That was more than I expected." "It was the truth," he said. "It was the least I could do." A long silence passed. The city breathed below them. "I am not the same woman you married," she said, finally turning to face him. "And you are not the same man. We cannot go back to what we were." "I don't want to go back," he said, his heart aching. "I want to go forward, with you, if you'll have me." She looked at him, her gaze deep and searching. He saw no sentimentality there, no easy forgiveness. He saw the clear, analytical eyes of the accountant weighing a proposition. Forgiveness is not a single event, Min-jun. It is a process, and trust, once broken, cannot be rebuilt. It must be built new, from a stronger foundation. She held up her hand, the simple gold band catching the light. "This ring is a symbol, but I am no longer interested in symbols. I am interested in realities. The reality is that you are learning to see, but you have been blind for a very long time. It will take practice." She laid out her terms, not as a vengeful spouse, but as a pragmatic partner. For 1 year, we will be partners, in full. You will not make a single significant decision without my counsel. You will not hide anything from me, and I will not hide anything from you. You will come with me to the docks, to the meetings with the families. You will learn the names of the people who hold up your world. You will not arrange, you will not perform. You will listen, you will see. It was not a promise of love. It was a probation, a chance to earn back, inch by inch, what he had so carelessly thrown away. And after 1 year, he asked. After 1 year, she said, a flicker of warmth finally entering her eyes. We will see what we have built, together. He nodded, accepting her terms completely. It was more than he deserved. It was a beginning. He looked out at the city, his city, and then back at his wife, his partner, his queen. He had arranged a world and lost it. Now, he would learn to see one, and maybe, in time, help to build it, the right way, beside her.